Japan, the land of discipline, technology, and self-reliance. A nation admired for its precision and strength. But what if I told you this proud, independent country just admitted something so shocking it left even their own people speechless? For decades, Japan hid a truth about Filipinos. A truth that once spoken changes not only Japan's future, but how the entire world views the Filipino people. Why now? Why reveal this confession today? And what does it mean for millions of families in the Philippines and across the globe? Stay with me, because what you're about to hear is not opinion, it's fact. And once you know, you'll never look at Japan or Filipinos the same way again. If you're interested in this topic, hit the like button, subscribe, and type interested in the comments, and I will give you a heart. Let's rewind the clock. On the surface, Japan looks like the very definition of a nation that has solved its own problems. It is the world's third largest economy, a titan of industry and innovation, a place of pristine bullet trains, mind-blowing robotics, and a culture that thrives on discipline and efficiency. But beneath that shiny, polished surface lies a ticking time bomb, a demographic crisis so profound it threatens to unravel the entire Japanese miracle. This is the story of a silent collapse, a nation on the brink of an unavoidable reckoning, and it's a story that they have desperately tried to keep from the world. But Japan is getting old, very old. In fact, Japan now has the oldest population in the entire world. A staggering 29.3% of its people are over the age of 65. That's a quarter of the population in a single category. By some metrics, that means more grandparents than working-age adults. Imagine a city where almost every third person you see is a senior. Who will care for them? Who will work the factories? Who will drive the economy forward? The very gears of their society are grinding to a halt. This is Japan's silent crisis, a demographic winter that threatens to plunge the country into darkness. And it's here where the story of Filipinos begins. Because while Japan's population shrinks, another force quietly steps in to keep the machine alive. Filipino workers. They are the caregivers in nursing homes, providing a level of personal attention that is in desperately short supply. They are the nurses in hospitals, the engineers in Japan's high-tech industries, and the teachers shaping the next generation. Even in essential but unglamorous fields like shipping, construction, and hospitality, the invisible workforce that keeps Japan's gears turning isn't just Japanese, it's Filipino. They are filling the jobs no one else can or will do. And the paradox is that their presence is both essential and, for a long time, was treated as a national embarrassment. Why Filipinos? Japan could have chosen workers from anywhere, but they didn't, because Filipinos bring something rare, something almost immeasurable. It's not just their high level of education and skill. It's not just their proficiency in English, which is a massive advantage in a global economy. It's something deeper. It's heart. Ask any Japanese family with a Filipino caregiver, and they'll tell you it's not just work, it's patience, dedication, and a genuine love for what they do that can't be measured on a payslip. It's the kind of human connection that robots can never replace, no matter how advanced they become. It is, in a word, humanity. But here's where it gets interesting. For years, Japan refused to talk about this openly. The pride of being a self-sufficient, monolithic society ran too deep. To admit a reliance on foreign workers felt like admitting weakness, like a public failure of their own national identity. And so, Filipinos lived in the shadows of Japan's success story. Invisible, unrecognized, but essential. They were the engine of the car, but they were never allowed to sit in the front seat. Their role was quietly acknowledged in private meetings and in demographic reports, but never in public speeches until now, because Japan's leaders just crossed a line they'd never dared cross before. They finally admitted this truth, a truth so bold it shocked their own citizens. Without Filipinos, Japan's future collapses. Think about that for a moment. A nation known for its pride, for its perfection, for never showing weakness or asking for help, now saying out loud to the entire world that they cannot survive without the Filipino people. This is not a small, quiet change. This is a monumental shift. It's a confession that changes the balance of power and rewrites the global playbook. It is a moment of unprecedented honesty for a nation that has perfected the art of keeping its secrets. And this wasn't whispered in backroom talks. It was said on record, publicly, in front of the world. And it was just the beginning. But before I reveal Japan's exact words, I want you to stop and think. If one of the strongest, most self-reliant economies in the world is saying this, what does that mean for the rest of us? For countries like South Korea, which faces a similar demographic cliff. For economic powerhouses like Singapore, whose tiny population depends on an unseen workforce, or even for the United States, which relies on hundreds of thousands of Filipino nurses, seafarers, and IT professionals to keep its own massive machine running. The dominoes are falling, and Japan's confession is the first, most powerful piece to tumble. If you're still watching right now, I want you to prove it. Comment the word truth below, because the truth is about to get even harder to ignore. Now, here's the part Japan never wanted you to hear. Behind closed doors, government reports showed that without foreign labor, and they specifically named Filipinos as the key, Japan's GDP would sink by billions. Nursing homes would be forced to shut down, hospitals would run short of essential personnel, high-tech factories would stall, and the very supply chains that deliver Japanese products to the world would break. In other words, the Japanese miracle would grind to a halt. The nation's entire post-war recovery and economic dominance was built on a foundation that, for the first time, was showing its deep, irreparable cracks. And yet for years, no leader dared say it. They kept Filipinos in the shadows, until finally, someone broke the silence. But what did Japan actually say? And why did it leave even their own people stunned? Why did this simple confession send shockwaves across the globe? That's coming up in the next segment, and trust me, it's not what you expect. When the news broke, it wasn't just a statement, it was a confession, a national reckoning delivered in front of the world. Standing before the cameras, a Japanese minister with a clear and unwavering voice spoke words that would resonate for a generation. The confession was an open acknowledgement of a dependency that went against every grain of Japanese tradition and national pride. The words were simple, yet devastatingly powerful. The officials stated without hesitation for the entire world to hear, Japan's future is tied to the Filipino people. Without them, our care system collapses. Without them, our economy weakens. Without them, Japan cannot stand. Do you realize how heavy those words are? This wasn't a casual remark to fill a quota. This was Japan, a nation that prides itself on strength, on order, and on self-sufficient independence, openly acknowledging they rely on another people for survival. For many Japanese citizens, it was like watching their national pride take a punch to the gut. Imagine being told that the very identity of your country, the country built on centuries of resilience, discipline, and sacrifice, is now tied to workers from another nation. It's a bitter pill to swallow. And yet, for millions of Filipinos, those words were nothing short of a profound validation. Validation of decades of sacrifice, of leaving home, of working long hours in a foreign land just to send money back to families in the Philippines. It was a formal, public acknowledgement that their contributions were not just wanted, but needed. Let's put this into perspective. There are more than 200,000 Filipinos currently living and working in Japan, according to official government data. Many of them are in caregiving, nursing, and technical fields, filling the gaps where Japan's own workforce has shrunk. But here's the part no one tells you. Japan doesn't just want them. Japan desperately needs them. Why? Because the nation is facing a demographic crisis with no end in sight. For every 100 Japanese workers retiring, there are only about 60 younger workers entering the labor force. That's an astonishing and unsustainable gap, a chasm no amount of robotics or automation can fill. And so, Filipinos, with their English skills, their proven adaptability, and a deep-seated value for family that translates into incredible compassion in caregiving roles, have become the human bridge keeping Japan from a complete social and economic collapse. But here's the twist. When the Japanese official made that statement, it sparked a firestorm of outrage among some groups. Critics argued, are we admitting weakness? Are we saying Japan cannot stand without foreigners? This is a national shame. The backlash was real and immediate. Nationalist voices, long relegated to the fringes, now had a focal point for their anger. They fired back, demanding Japan should be for the Japanese only, arguing for a return to a purely homogenous society. But the numbers don't lie. The demographic facts were unshakable. Without immigration, and specifically without the thousands of Filipinos filling the most critical jobs, Japan's economic future is not just at risk, it's doomed. This is the paradox of a deeply proud nation. The very people rejecting foreign workers are the ones whose parents are being cared for, whose cities are being maintained, and whose economy is being propped up by those same foreigners. Think about the courage it took to say those words out loud, because once the truth was spoken, there was no taking it back. Japan had just placed Filipinos in the global spotlight. It had created a new reality. But let me ask you something. If you were a Filipino working in Japan, hearing those words, how would it make you feel? Would it be a moment of pure pride? Of course, but maybe also a deep, bittersweet ache, knowing it took a national crisis and a generational labor shortage before your worth was finally acknowledged. It's the kind of validation that comes with a heavy price. And here's where the story deepens. Because that statement wasn't just about today's workers, it was about the next generation too. Japan isn't just admitting Filipinos are vital now. They're saying they'll be vital for the very future of Japan itself. If you're still watching right now, I want you to comment the word honor down below, because honor is exactly what's at stake here. Japan honoring the Filipino people, and Filipinos honoring the sacrifices of their kabayans abroad. This is about a new, more balanced relationship built not on quiet dependence, but on open, mutual respect. It's a shift in the global order that is both profound and long overdue. Now here's something the media didn't show you. Alongside that public confession, Japan quietly released internal labor projections showing they'll need over 340,000 foreign workers in the next few years. That's more than a 50% increase in their current foreign workforce. And guess who's at the top of that recruitment list? Filipinos. Because unlike other groups, Filipinos already share deep, subtle cultural ties with Japan. They adapt quickly, they bring language skills, and most importantly, they bring that deep value of family and community. In caregiving roles, in hospitality, and in service industries, that is priceless. It's a value that cannot be taught in a classroom or programmed into a machine. Japan knows this. They've seen it firsthand. And that's why they're not just looking for workers. They are specifically recruiting the Filipino people. But the confession and these new projections raised a dangerous question, a fear that no one in Japan wants to talk about. If Filipinos are this essential, what happens if they leave? What happens if one day Filipinos decide Japan no longer deserves their service? What happens if a better opportunity arises elsewhere? That's the unspoken terror now looming over Japan. It's the ultimate paradox. The more essential a group of people becomes, the more powerful they become. This is the part of our episode titled, How Much Money Do You Fear Become? That's the beginning of a show that has all the, and that's why Japan's shocking words were more than just flattery. They were a warning to themselves and to the world. Because here's the cliffhanger. Those shocking words were only the beginning. What Japan said next about Filipinos left even their closest allies stunned. They didn't just admit they needed Filipinos, they said something so profound, so groundbreaking, that it changed the entire relationship between the two nations forever. And if you think you've heard everything already, you haven't. The most jaw-dropping part of this confession is still coming. Stick with me, because in the next segment, we reveal how Japan now sees Filipinos not as guests, not as workers, but as hidden heroes. By now, you understand Japan's shocking confession. You know they admitted their future is tied to the Filipino people. But what comes next is even more powerful. Because once those words were spoken, once the truth was finally out in the open, something fundamental shifted. Filipinos, once invisible, suddenly stood in the spotlight. Their role was no longer a quiet secret, it was a celebrated fact. And here's the part most people don't realize. Filipinos aren't just filling empty jobs in Japan. They're shaping entire industries, providing the crucial human element that technology can't replicate. They are the true hidden heroes of modern Japan. But let's start with healthcare. Japan has the highest percentage of elderly citizens on the planet, with nearly 30% of its people over the age of 65. By 2040, nearly 1 in 3 Japanese citizens will be in this category. Without a massive and compassionate workforce, this system crumbles. And do you know who's stepping in? Filipinos! Not robots, not new policies, the Filipino people. Visit any nursing home in Tokyo or Osaka, and you'll find Filipino nurses and caregivers providing something no machine can replace. Empathy, a gentle voice, a patient hand, a willingness to treat someone else's parent like their own. This is the Filipino spirit in action, and it's the only thing that can truly solve Japan's deepening care crisis. And then there's shipbuilding and shipping. Japan is one of the world's top shipbuilding nations, and a huge part of its economy relies on trade. But guess who makes up a massive percentage of the crews keeping those massive ships running? Filipino seafarers. It's estimated that over 70% of Japan's merchant marine workers are Filipinos. Think about that. Without them, Japan's trade routes choke, its exports wouldn't reach the world, its imports would be stuck at sea. The very lifeblood of their economy would stall. And in hospitality, walk into hotels, restaurants, and service industries across Japan and you'll hear Filipino voices. They're the bridge between tourists and locals, making Japan more accessible and welcoming to the outside world. They are the smiling faces that keep the tourism machine running. And yet, despite all this, Filipinos have long been the hidden heroes. The oxygen in the room. Invisible, unspoken, but absolutely essential. Because here's the truth. You don't notice oxygen until it's gone. And if Filipinos vanish from Japan tomorrow, you'd notice fast. Hospitals would overflow with a sudden lack of nurses and caregivers. Shipping lanes would stall, causing a national economic crisis. Entire industries would collapse, and the polished image of Japan would be tarnished forever. But instead of fearing that reality, Japan has finally admitted it. They're now beginning to honor it. Think about that shift. From being background players to being called out by name as the very reason Japan still stands. That's not just recognition, that's history being rewritten. It's a moment of truth that changes the narrative for an entire people. And I want you to feel this personally. Imagine being a Filipino working in Japan, away from your family, often lonely, sometimes invisible. And then suddenly hearing leaders of one of the most powerful nations on earth say, "Without you, we cannot stand." That's not just acknowledgement, that's validation. Validation of every tear shed at the airport. Validation of every long shift worked. Validation of a dignity that was often overlooked. It's the validation of the Filipino spirit, a spirit of resilience that has endured for decades and is now finally being recognized on the world stage. If you've made it this far, drop the word pride in the comments. Because that's what this moment is really about. Pride in the resilience of Filipinos, pride in the sacrifices of OFWs, and pride in finally being seen for what they truly are, indispensable. But here's the thing, Japan's shocking words aren't just about recognition, they're a warning too. Because if Japan is this dependent on Filipinos today, what does that say about tomorrow? The truth is, Filipinos have become the safety net not just for Japan, but for entire nations across the globe. South Korea, the Middle East, even the United States. And if Japan is brave enough to say it out loud, which country will be next? But before we answer that, Japan still had one more confession to make. A final statement that no one saw coming, not even their closest allies. This last part is the most critical of all. It's the final piece of the puzzle because in their final statement, Japan didn't just call Filipinos essential, they called them something even greater. They didn't just acknowledge their labor, they acknowledged their humanity. And in doing so, they provided a blueprint for how a country can not only survive, but thrive in the 21st century. This last part is the climax. Stay tuned, because this last part is the climax. We've reached the turning point. You've heard Japan's shocking admission that they need Filipinos to survive. You've seen how Filipinos keep Japan's industries alive, acting as the quiet, indispensable backbone. But now comes the part that left everyone truly speechless. Because Japan didn't stop at saying, "We need Filipinos." No, they went further. They said something no one thought they'd ever admit. A senior Japanese official, a symbol of the nation's core values, stood before a press conference and declared with a profound seriousness that sent shockwaves across the globe. The Filipino people are no longer just workers in Japan. They are the lifeblood of our nation's future. It was a confession that rewrote an entire history. Lifeblood. Let that word sink in. That's not a word you use lightly. Not for a nation, not for a people. That word means essential. It means core. It means without it, the body withers and dies. They didn't say assistants or helpers or a valuable labor pool. They said lifeblood. That means without Filipinos, Japan itself cannot survive. It's an organic, visceral truth that no amount of pride or technology can change. And in that moment, something incredible happened. For decades, Filipinos in Japan were background figures, silent, overlooked, sometimes even discriminated against. But now, they were placed at the very center of Japan's survival story. The script was flipped. The roles were reversed. Imagine what that does to identity. For the Japanese, it's humbling. For a nation that has so long prized its self-sufficiency, this is the ultimate act of public vulnerability. It's a moment of surrender to a truth that was undeniable. And for Filipinos, it's deeply empowering because suddenly the world isn't just seeing them as laborers, they're seeing them as heroes. They're seeing them as the people who came to a nation's aid when it was in its deepest moment of need. It's a validation of sacrifice, a recognition of dignity, and a powerful acknowledgement that true value is found not in technology, but in the human spirit. And this one powerful act sparked a global conversation. Japan's final confession was a catalyst. It was the first domino to fall. South Korea, facing an identical demographic crisis, began revisiting its own quiet dependence on Filipinos. Middle Eastern nations, too, whose economies are powered by a massive Filipino workforce, began to reconsider their own narratives. There were even whispers in Europe, where an aging population is forcing governments to rethink their immigration policies. Because if Japan, the titan of tech and efficiency, can openly say this, who's next? Who will be brave enough to admit the same? This is more than just a labor story. This is a story about a new kind of power. A power that flows not from military might or economic dominance, but from the essential human resources that the world has come to depend on. And here's a chilling thought. What happens if one day Filipinos decide to stop, to come home, to no longer be the world's invisible backbone? What happens if they choose to build a better life for themselves in the Philippines rather than abroad? Entire economies would collapse. Nations would stumble. Hospitals would be left without nurses. Shipping would stall. Families in far-off lands would be left helpless. This is the untold power of the Filipino people, a power they never claimed, but the world cannot live without. And Japan's words just proved it. They are the lifeblood of the global economy, the unseen force that keeps everything running. That's why, if you're watching right now, I want you to comment the words Filipino people below, because it's the Filipino people who are the real headline here. Not Japan's confession, not the shockwaves in the news, but the people behind it all. The workers, the dreamers, the parents, the children, the Filipino people who are the global source of resilience, compassion, and a human touch that is simply irreplaceable. They are the reason the world keeps turning. Japan's shocking words didn't just leave people speechless, they left the world with a choice: to continue ignoring the truth or to finally honor it. And today, we honor it. The Filipino people are not replaceable, they are not invisible, they are essential. To Japan, to Asia, to the entire world, they are the lifeblood. And now, the world finally knows their name.